The prairie stretched endless and empty, a sea of dry grass rolling under a bruised sky. Clouds dragged their shadows low, and the smell of rain rode the wind though none had fallen in weeks. From the barn came the sound of leather splitting air, then the dull slap of flesh. Ellen May's body arched against the post where she was bound, her lips clamped tight to keep from crying out. Her husband's breath, heavy with whiskey, filled the space between lash and skin. Jedediah Cross had grown harder with each barren season, with every child his neighbors cradled that he could not have. His face was the color of dust, cracked by sun and bitterness, his eyes like pale iron. He cursed as he swung, not words meant for her, but for fate, for God, for the unseen curse he swore had settled on his house. "A man's worth is his name," he spat, whip coiling and snapping again. "And you give me none. Not a son, not a daughter. Nothing but silence." The barn groaned with the storm outside, the lantern flickering against the rafters as though the building itself bore witness to her punishment. Ellen's fingers dug into the rope until her nails tore. She would not scream for him, not now. She had once begged, once pleaded, but she had learned that her silence hurt him more. Her body was thin from labor and meager meals, but within her still lived a stubborn ember, a defiance that refused to die no matter how he tried to beat it out. That ember stared through swollen eyes and thought of a time before him, before her father sold her hand for land. She had dreamt of laughter, of the scent of fresh bread in the kitchen she owned, of arms that might hold her gently. That dream felt like another woman's memory now. Distant as the mountains on the horizon, Jedediah dropped the whip at last, sweat pouring from his brow. He muttered about how even mules could breed, how his neighbors whispered behind his back. He tugged her down from the post and left her in the straw, walking out into the rising wind. The door slammed, and the storm outside rattled the walls like a giant's fist. She lay there, cheek pressed to the dirt, her body trembling not with pain but with the weight of her own silence. When she staggered to her feet, she touched her ribs and winced. Every breath was fire. She went to the barn door and peered out. Across the distance, the prairie swallowed the sun and the horizon bled red. In town that day, she had seen a man she had not meant to notice, Samuel Hart. He had been loading sacks of flour into a wagon with children clinging to his legs. His eldest, a boy nearly grown, had lifted a crate with him, while a younger girl had held his coat as though afraid he might vanish. They had not spoken, she and the rancher, but his eyes had caught hers, dark, heavy, but kind. She remembered how he bent low to tie a child's bootlace, patient in a way that made her chest ache with envy. That image lingered like a lantern flame in her mind as she stood there in the barn doorway. Jedediah's voice roared again from the house, a shadow passing the window, his shoulders hunched and looming. He had taken to talking to himself more each night, as though the world around him conspired. The land had given him little, droughts, failed crops, a barren wife. He was a man splintered by the weight of disappointment, and splinters only cut deeper with time. Ellen knew by the way his jaw set, by the wild look when he returned from the saloon, that he was close to some final cruelty. Night fell thick and sudden. The storm that had threatened all day broke loose. Rain hammered the roof, leaking through old wood. Thunder rolled across the sky like distant cannon fire. Ellen lay in bed with her back to him, every muscle braced. She listened as he paced the floorboards, muttering of names lost, of heirs unborn. He drank until the bottle clattered empty against the wall. Then his voice sank lower, thick with venom. "Maybe it's time you learn what a lesson feels like when it lasts." Her heart pounded in the silence that followed. Lightning lit the room, and she saw his shadow stretch long against the wall, whip in hand again, even in the house. The rain seemed to hush for a moment, as though the land itself held breath. Ellen closed her eyes and thought of the children in the wagon, their small hands clutching at Samuel's coat. She thought of how gently he had lifted his daughter into the seat, the way she had nestled into him without fear. Something in her, bruised but unbroken, whispered that there had to be a place in this world where a woman could live without chains. Jedediah staggered, then collapsed into his chair, overcome by drink before he could act. The whip coiled on the floor, like a snake waiting for dawn. Ellen lay awake beside him, listening to the storm batter the house, her mind racing. Each crack of thunder struck not just the sky but her soul. She felt the decision forming inside her, sharp and solid. If she stayed, she would die, not in body perhaps, but in spirit, and that death was worse. When dawn crept gray across the prairie, she rose with eyes hollow but resolute. Jedediah snored heavy behind her. She touched her bruised cheek and saw her reflection faintly in the warped glass. There was no beauty left to her, but there was strength still, waiting. She gathered her shawl, her boots, and tucked beneath her arm a knife from the kitchen. Outside, the field stretched endless. The storm washed clean but still heavy with the smell of wet earth. Somewhere beyond, she knew, stood another homestead, another life. One where children laughed even in hunger, one where a man's voice did not always cut like a lash. She pressed her palm against the doorframe, as though bidding farewell to a grave, then stepped into the morning. The horizon beckoned, uncertain, wide, and alive with possibility. She did not yet know where her feet would carry her, only that she could not remain in the shadow of Jedediah Cross. Behind her, the house stood like a wound upon the land. Ahead, the prairie wind whispered a change. The road bled into open prairie, a narrow scar through grassland silvered by moonlight. Ellen May walked it barefoot, the soles of her feet cut raw by gravel, the wind pressing cold against her bruises. Each step carried her farther from the house where Jedediah Cross slept in drunken ruin, whip coiled at his side like a snake dreaming of violence. She did not look back. Behind her, the horizon burned faint with the first hint of dawn, but ahead was only darkness and the unknown. Her body swayed, weak from pain, but some engine deep inside kept her moving. Coyotes yipped from the ridges, and every sound pricked her nerves. Hoofbeats imagined her husband's voice carried on the wind. At times she thought of laying herself down and letting the prairie swallow her, but the memory of a wagon in town, for children clinging to a tired rancher, pulled her forward. That image had seated itself in her, fragile as it was, and now it was the only light she could follow. When the road dissolved into mud, she stumbled, fell hard, and stayed down long enough to taste the wet earth. It grounded her, reminded her she was alive despite the bruises and scars that claimed her skin. She rose again and pressed on, arms wrapped tight against the chill. At last, far off through the mist of rain, she saw the faint glow of a lantern. It swung gently, marking the gate of a homestead. She leaned on the post when she reached it, her breath torn ragged, her knees trembling. The dogs barked first, deep-throated guardians roused from sleep. Then came a creak of wood, the door opening, and a man's shadow lengthened across the yard. A rifle glinted in his hand, steady even in the half-light. "Who goes there?" The voice was low but firm, without malice, carrying the authority of one who had reason to protect. Ellen swayed, unable to speak. The lantern rose higher, revealing Samuel Hart. His face was worn, lined from years of wind and worry, but his eyes caught hers, dark as the soil after rain. She collapsed before she could answer. When her senses returned, warmth pressed around her. She lay on a rug near the hearth, the crackle of fire filling the silence. Shadows shifted. Small figures gathered around, whispering. A boy of 15, tall for his age, with a jaw already set hard, kept a rifle near. "Pa! She could be trouble," he muttered. A younger boy tugged at his sleeve, uncertain, while a girl, hair loose over her shoulders, crept closer with a blanket. Samuel crouched by Ellen's side, one hand resting on his knee, the other steady on the floorboards. He did not touch her, only studied the bruises that mapped her face. "You came far to end up at my door," he said softly, not so much a question as a recognition. Ellen shifted, pulling the blanket closer to her throat. "I shouldn't stay. You've no call to keep me." The eldest boy spoke before Samuel could. "Pa, send her off. Jed Cross will come looking, and he'll bring hell with him." His eyes, dark and sharp, carried fear under bravado. Samuel's gaze lingered on Ellen. "If a soul falls bleeding on your doorstep, you don't turn them back to the wolves. That's law enough in this house." His tone silenced the boy. He stood and stirred the fire, adding wood with careful movements, as though the decision was already made. Ellen's throat tightened. No one had spoken for her in years. She wanted to argue, to leave before her presence cursed them, but her limbs betrayed her. Her body sank deeper into the rug, exhaustion taking hold. The girl, perhaps 10, knelt at Ellen's side. "You look like Ma did when she was sick," she whispered, child voice tender, curious. Ellen swallowed hard. That single comparison struck deeper than any kindness. Through the haze of fatigue, she watched the family. The 3 boys clustered near the door. The eldest, Luke, stiff and suspicious. The middle child, Jacob, fiddling nervously with a carved wooden toy. The youngest, Eli, small and wide-eyed. Mary, the only daughter, sat close with her blanket draped around Ellen's shoulders. For children, each carrying their mother's absence in different ways. And Samuel, holding them together with a quiet strength, though she could see the weight of it bowing his frame. Night wore on. Rain pattered against the windows. Ellen could not sleep, her mind circling. She saw herself reflected in the cracked glass, hollow-cheeked, eyes ringed in shadow. She feared the whip would find her even here, that Jedediah's rage was a storm no walls could hold out. Her fingers curled tight around the knife she had carried from her kitchen, hidden now beneath the blanket. Samuel sat at the table, oil lamp burning beside him. He whittled at a piece of wood, his hand steady, his eyes occasionally lifting toward her. Not suspicious, not prying, only watchful, as though measuring her silence. At last he spoke across the room. "You've been hurt bad." She flinched. "It's no matter." "It is. And it'll matter worse when he comes knocking." His knife scraped slow against the wood. Men like Cross don't give up what they think belongs to them. Her breath caught. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. She thought of leaving again, running until she collapsed in the dust, but Mary's small hand had found her own. It was warm, fragile, and it anchored her. Luke broke the silence. "Pa, she'll bring him here. You said we had to keep to ourselves. We've done that since Ma." He stopped short, jaw tightening. His grief was plain, a blade not yet dulled by time. Samuel set the knife down. "I said we don't turn away folk in need. That hasn't changed." He looked at Ellen, his expression unreadable but steady. "You don't have to tell us yet, but when the time comes, you'll need to decide whether you're running from him or towards something else." The words pierced her like a brand. For years she had known only running. From blows, from hunger, from the weight of her own silence. Towards something else? The thought was foreign, almost impossible. Yet here in the flicker of firelight, with children huddled close and Samuel's voice anchoring the storm outside, she felt for the first time in years the faintest edge of safety. Outside, the dog barked sudden and sharp. All heads turned. Samuel rose at once, rifle in hand, the children tense with instinct. Ellen's heart lurched. Through the window, a lone rider moved along the ridge. The silhouette cut black against the pale wash of dawn. The figure lingered a moment, then vanished into the folds of land. Ellen's breath came shallow, dread curling tight around her ribs. She knew that shadow, knew the weight of the gaze even from afar. Jedediah Cross had already begun his hunt. The days that followed unfolded like the tightening of a noose. Ellen remained in the Hart household, moving softly through its rooms, as though afraid to disturb a balance not hers to claim. She swept floors, mended shirts, gathered eggs with Mary at her side, but she felt the weight of suspicion in Luke's eyes. The boy watched her, as though she were a spark that might set the whole house aflame. Jacob and Eli softened first, trailing after her with shy offerings, a wildflower, a smooth stone, a feather plucked from a yard. Mary clung most fiercely, slipping her hand into Ellen's whenever Samuel wasn't looking, as though she'd already decided she belonged. Samuel carried the air of a man caught between two duties, to his children and to his conscience. His hands worked the ranch as they always had, hauling fence posts, guiding the plow horse, fixing a roof beam loosened by the storm, but his eyes often drifted to Ellen, measuring her silence. He did not press her with questions, not yet, but she sensed the storm brewing behind his calm. He was a man who had buried a wife, who knew the shape of grief, but he was also one who would not easily open his doors to danger. Trouble did not take long to find them. Word spread quick in town. Jedediah Cross had been stomping through saloons, fists heavy, voice louder than the thunder. He demanded to know who had seen his wife. He promised coin for those who pointed the way and promised blood for those who lied. The sheriff himself rode out to Hart's ranch, hat low, eyes uneasy. He warned Samuel plain, "You got a woman under your roof who don't belong. You best send her back." Jed Cross is a man who don't take shame quiet. Samuel listened, face carved from stone, and gave no reply beyond a tight nod. The sheriff rode off with the sense of a man relieved not to linger. That evening, Ellen found Samuel by the corral, tightening a saddle strap. The air was heavy with dust and twilight, the kind of stillness that holds a land before it breaks. "You should turn me out," she whispered. "It'll be worse if you don't." Samuel's gaze did not shift from the saddle. "You think you deserve the whip again?" She swallowed hard. "I think I'll bring it down on your children." Now he looked at her, eyes dark and sharp. "What you bring is no choice of his. The choice is mine. And I won't teach my sons that a man saves his own skin by casting out the broken." His voice cracked on the last word, low but steady. Ellen felt it strike something deep, something she had buried under years of silence. That night, she sat by the fire with the children. Luke remained aloof, carving at a stick with his knife, but Jacob leaned against her arm, sleepy-eyed, and Mary nestled against her lap. Eli, the youngest, asked bluntly why her face carried shadows of blue and yellow. Ellen froze, but before she could answer, Samuel spoke from the doorway. Because some men confuse strength with cruelty. His voice carried no rage, only weariness. The children quieted, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. But Ellen felt the truth building inside her, pressing against her ribs. Later, when the children slept, she told Samuel. She spoke of nights spent tied to posts, of the words hissed in her ear, useless, barren, cursed. She confessed how she had once prayed for a child just to still his hand, then prayed again for the mercy of never bearing one into his violence. She trembled as she spoke, yet her words cut sharp in the air, filling the room with the ache of years lost. Samuel listened in stillness, his hands resting on the table. When she finished, he did not answer at once. Only after fire cracked did he say, quietly, "The land takes as much as it gives. I lost my wife to it. You lost your peace. Doesn't make us less worthy of living." His eyes held hers, steady as stone, and for a fleeting moment she felt anchored. The peace of the ranch frayed as rumors thickened. Ellen saw Jedediah's shadow in every rider passing the road, heard his voice in the creak of the windmill. Luke confronted her outright one evening, fury simmering in his young voice. "He'll come for you, and when he does, it won't just be you he kills. It'll be Pa, it'll be us." He stood before her, taller than she remembered, trying to wear a man's anger though his hands shook. "Why should we risk everything for you?" Ellen's lips parted, then closed again. She had no answer that could soothe his fear. She carried too much of it herself. But Mary appeared behind him, clutching Ellen's skirt, eyes wide with childlike certainty. "Because she needs us," the girl said simply. Luke turned away, jaw tight, but his silence carried less certainty than before. The days grew longer, each hour stretched thin with waiting. Ellen rose before dawn, fetching water, tending to chores, her body stronger now though her heart raced at every sound. She felt the bond weaving with the children in small, unspoken ways. Jacob laughing when she teased his hair, Eli chasing her shadow across the yard, Mary humming as she braided Ellen's hair with clumsy fingers. Even Luke, though distant, sometimes watched her without the same hard edge, as though wrestling with some question he could not voice. Then came the night when the dogs barked wild, teeth flashing in the dark. Samuel was already at the door with his rifle. When Ellen reached for the knife, she kept beneath her pillow. The children huddled close, Luke gripping a lantern, the younger three pressed behind him. Through the window, the horizon burned faint with torchlight, moving slow along the ridge. Jedediah's voice carried across the distance, a low boom rolling over the grass like thunder. He called her name, stretching it long, mocking, promising. "Ellen May, you think you can hide, girl? You think a man forgets what's his?" The night held its breath. The whip cracked once, its echo slicing through the silence. Ellen felt her knees weaken, but she did not fall. Samuel stood at the threshold, rifle raised, his children behind him, and she knew the storm she had fled was upon them at last. The prairie lay silvered under the moon, the grass bending in the restless wind. Torches burned along the ridge where Jedediah crossed, and 2 hired riders sat astride their horses, their shapes black against the pale light. His voice carried again, harsh and cutting, threaded with drink and rage. "LMA, you think you can run from what's mine? You'll crawl back before I'm done." The whip cracked through the night, a sound so sharp it seemed to slice the air in two. Inside the Hart house, silence pressed heavy. The children huddled close, eyes wide, breath shallow. Ellen stood in the shadow of the firelight. Fingers curled tight around the handle of the knife she had kept hidden since the night she fled. Her body trembled, but her eyes were steady. Samuel moved to the door, rifle across his arm, his shoulders squared. He looked back once, gaze meeting hers. She saw no fear there, only a grave steadiness that told her he had already chosen. The door opened, and cold air rushed in, carrying with it the reek of smoke and sweat. Samuel stepped out, boots heavy against the porch boards. "Cross," he called, his voice deep and measured, carrying across the dark. "This house won't open for you. Turn back now." Jedediah leaned forward in the saddle, torchlight catching the ruin of his face. "That woman's my wife. She belongs to me, and I'll take her back whether you stand in my way or not." "She belongs to no man," Samuel answered. The rifle rose slightly, his stance widening. "Not you, not me." The riders flanking Jedediah shifted uneasily. One spat, muttering under his breath, but Jedediah only grinned a wolf's grin, all teeth and spite. He swung down from his horse, whip in hand, pistol at his hip. His boots struck the dirt hard, his body looming, shadows stretching long. "You got 4 children under your roof, Hart. Think what happens when a man's rage runs out of rope. Think what I'll do when I'm through with you." He cracked the whip again, closer this time, the sound snapping against the fence rail. Inside the house, Luke pressed his siblings back from the door, his jaw locked, his hands trembling around the lantern. Mary buried her face in Ellen's skirts, whispering prayers under her breath. Ellen's heart thundered, but something inside her shifted, sharp as the edge of her knife. She had lived too long under the weight of his lash, too long bent by his shadow. Tonight, she would not be bent again. Jedediah strode toward the porch. Samuel stood his ground, the rifle steady. The moment hung suspended, the night itself holding its breath. Then the whip lashed forward, curling across Samuel's face, tearing skin and leaving a streak of blood. Samuel staggered, but he did not fall. He lifted the rifle and fired into the dirt at Jedediah's feet, the thunder of the shot echoing across the land. Horses reared, torches flickered. Jedediah only laughed, the sound ragged, mad. He lunged up the steps, whip raised high. Ellen burst in the doorway, knife flashing. She caught the whip mid-swing, leather burning her palm, and with her other hand drove the blade into the back of his hand. He howled, dropping the handle, blood spraying against the boards. For a breath the world froze, his shock, her defiance, Samuel's gaze locking on hers. Jedediah shoved her hard, sending her sprawling. He drew his pistol, fury twisting his features. Samuel lunged, knocking the barrel aside as the shot rang out wild into the night. They grappled, bodies crashing against the rail, fists striking, blood mingling with dust. The fight was raw, brutal, stripped of words. Samuel's strength met Jedediah's fury, each blow fueled by years of grief and rage. The children screamed inside. Luke grabbed his father's spare rifle, his knuckles white. Ellen rose, pain shooting through her ribs, but she would not fall back. She rushed forward again, seizing the whip from where it had fallen, the leather slick with blood. She pulled it taut in her hands, her eyes fixed on a man who had owned her in chains of fear. Samuel and Jedediah crashed to the ground, rolling in the dirt. Jedediah clawed for his pistol once more. Samuel struck his wrist, sending the weapon skittering across the yard. In desperation, Jedediah snatched a rock, raising it high, and then the shot cracked. Luke stood in the doorway, rifle smoking in his hands, his body rigid, his face pale. The bullet struck true. Jedediah jerked, eyes wide, the rocks slipping from his fingers. He collapsed to the dirt, breath rattling once, then falling still. The torches on the ridge wavered as his hired riders turned and spurred their horses away, unwilling to fight for a dead man. Silence settled, broken only by the panting of those who remained. Samuel pushed himself to his knees, blood streaking his face, chest heaving. Ellen dropped the whip, her hand shaking, the weight of it falling from her as if it had never belonged to her at all. She looked to Luke, who still gripped the rifle, eyes wet with tears he refused to shed. Samuel rose slowly, crossing to his son. He laid a hand on the boy's shoulder, steadying him. "You did what had to be done," he said softly. Luke's jaw clenched, but he nodded, his eyes flicking to Ellen. In that look, she saw not blame but something rawer, recognition, the bond of shared survival. Ellen sank to her knees in the dirt beside Jedediah's body. She expected to feel guilt, sorrow, some mourning for the years she had been bound to him. Instead, she felt only release, a hollow unshackling. Tears burned her eyes, but they were not for him. They were for herself, for the years stolen, for the woman she might have been. She rose again, slow, steady, and when Samuel reached out a hand, she took it. Morning came pale and gold across the prairie. The house still stood, scarred by violence, but alive with a quiet hum of breath. Ellen stood on the porch with Mary's hand tucked in hers. The boys gathered near their father. The whip lay forgotten in the yard, dirt and blood caking its leather. Samuel's face was bruised, but his eyes were clear as he looked out at the horizon. "Family ain't always the ones you're born to," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. "Sometimes it's the ones who stand when the storm breaks." Ellen felt the words anchor in her chest. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. The land stretched endless before them, no longer a prison, but a promise. Mary leaned closer and whispered, "You're ours now." Ellen bent her head, pressing her cheek to the child's hair, and the tears that came were soft, unburdened. The prairie wind moved through the grass, carrying away the last echoes of Jedediah Cross. And in its place, silence bloomed wide and alive, leaving only the sound of family beginning again.